Good morning, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff, Kennedy's Man to Smash the CIA, but it's actually now called McDuff underscore 2020 because that's the name of my backup channel, which of course now is my main channel since YouTube terminated my channel, McDuff, Kennedy's Man to Smash the CIA. But I think that McDuff is still on the job, and so here we are on McDuff underscore 2020 this morning to continue our work, which I think this morning we can focus on the question of Joe Biden. What is a Joe Biden? What does he represent? Is he really a person, or is he just a construct of the CIA? And tell you the truth, I'm finding myself more and more questioning whether he's even really actually a real person. Well, that is the question for today, and while I think it's a little bit facetious, it's also got a lot of interesting things to look into. So yeah, it is a badge of honor to get banned by YouTube. Unfortunately, it definitely cuts down on your reach because I was getting close to 12,000 subscribers, and now I am back getting close to 3,000 subscribers. However, you're spreading the word for me, and I appreciate it. We'll be back up to 12,000 in maybe a month or so if we keep going as fast as we are, gaining about 1,000 views per month right now, and I'd like to see that increase so we can really broaden the reach of McDuff and his effort to smash the CIA. So much going on right now. I want to take a little bit of your time, though, to review some articles, and first of all, let's start off with some of my personal observations. Number one, the first time I heard of Joe Biden was when he cheated. If you don't remember, he was a plagiarist, I think in his, was it a law school exam? Anyway, it was something significant that he and his people just kind of rolled past, and we don't hear about that much anymore. And thanks, Tyrone. Thanks a lot. We don't hear much about Biden plagiarism, but it's there. It's a fact. The history is there, and you can look it up. So why would anybody want to have a plagiarist represent them in the Senate? Well, perhaps if you control the state of Delaware, you have lots of uses for a good plagiarist. And that idea of plagiarism is reflected in the first quote that I want to give you, and this one is from Lyndon LaRouche back in 1987. And in 1987, Lyndon LaRouche published an article called "The Deeper Grounds for Philosophical Doubts Respecting the Existence of Joe Biden," September 28, 1987, in Executive Intelligence Review. And the article was reprinted on November the 20th of 2020 in the same publication online. So where shall I start with this? Here we go. I'm going to start under the heading Left, Right, and Center. And it begins with an identification of the source of that, those three divisions of politics as being the political classifications of right, left, and center are fictions mystically attributed to the seating arrangements in France's National Assembly of 1789 to 1793. Near the close of this year, that's 1987's Major League Baseball season, plagiarist Joe Biden stepped up to score 2 fouls followed by a wildly swinging third strike, and was then thrown out of the 1988 campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination. So much of Senator Biden is now attributed to be a carbon copy of other persons that a humorist might be forced to speculate whether or not, quote, Joe Biden were merely a computer-synthesized laser hologram pieced together out of entries taken from Bartlett's familiar quotations. Wit begs, thus, philosophical doubts that, quote, Senator Biden actually exists. His birth certificate is probably genuine, but his public personality is an empty shell of borrowed rhetoric. Biden tried to rally the Democratic Party's McGovernite left around his candidacy. His qualification for appealing to so diverse an aggregation of New Agers was his effort to say nothing which might offend any faction within that collection. This he accomplished by saying nothing, which was not plagiarized bits of tested rhetoric, thus gaining adherents' applause for saying, really, nothing at all. However, Biden merely made most painfully obvious what is equally true of all the recent competitors for the Democratic nomination. They are all four-flushers. Four-flushers is a word I haven't heard in a while, but what it means is somebody that claims to have a flush, which is 5 cards, but only has 4. So he's bluffing. He's building up a case that he has something, which he really has nothing. This is true not only of those who attempt to capture the support of the McGovernite left, the same is true of those who propose to establish themselves as symbolic leaders of the philosophical right, or the, quote, liberal center, unquote. Not all politicians are four-flushers, but all who adopt the posture of attempting to symbolize the left, right, or center tend to be as devoid of personality as the former candidate, Joe Biden. Well, he goes on to criticize the balls and strikes, and it all has to do with stuff that's probably a little bit too dated for us to be concerned with right now. It was in the Robert Bork nomination, and the idea was that Biden was supposedly supporting on the part of the left, and Lloyd Cutler on the right, but in fact it was all fake. It was all fake opposition and fake debates. Again, I commend you the article, especially if you are somebody who remembers the Bork debates. It was a real interesting time. I want to add a little bit more generally what he has to say about left, right, and center. This is LaRouche speaking. I have often been challenged, as many citizens have observed, with the question, is Lyndon LaRouche really left or right? He rejects both appellations and says that in truth, left, right, and center are of the same nature as masks or maskings. Isn't that interesting? Masks. Like those citizens who vote for candidates on the basis of perceiving them to be left, right, or center, they are acting out of fantasy. And here's, I think, is one of my favorite parts of this essay. It is the ancient custom of the degenerated families of Venice to go forth at night, masked, in the company of armed bands of homicidal delinquents, and either to murder or play pranks of kindred colors. In truth, left, right, and center are of the same nature as maskings. Instead of attending to real issues in real-life circumstances, the nightly marauder, the Venetian bravo, acts out of a fantasy life. So do all who sally into politics as leftist, right-wing, or center political figures. those citizens who vote for candidates on the basis of perceiving them to be left, right, or center are also acting out of a fantasy. So he develops that theme very well in this essay. I'm not going to linger here on the 1987 essay, because I think what really has spurred me to do this show this morning is an article that I have read by Yoichi Shimatsu. Now, who is Yoichi Shimatsu? He is an author who has been writing with the Rense organization, jeffrense.com, which is one of the most, what would I say? It's one of the most attacked alternate facilities, alternate news and journalism sites. So if you ever think of Rense.com, R-E-N-S-E, the first thing you'll run into is debunking. They probably are quite famous at Snopes and everywhere, because they do attract a lot of flack. So why am I now looking at a writer that is associated with Rense.com? And the answer to that is our good friend and colleague in this fight, Professor Hamamoto. Because Professor Hamamoto told me about Yoichi Shimatsu's work about 2 months ago, and I started looking at it, and I can tell you, this guy is good. He's been writing amazing articles on COVID, and oops, I just said COVID. Oops, I just said it again. Uh-oh. Well, on the assumption that YouTube is not going to trash this channel right now, I'm going to continue and see if we can get the show done. But this essay really strikes me as resonating with a lot of truth and things that you would really have to dig real hard to verify. And as I heard from Professor Hamamoto, as I asked him about this morning, he said, you're going to have a hard time trying to get him to verify things. It's hard to pin him down. Nevertheless, it's a great source. And so I'm venturing forward into this because I think it's really, really worthwhile. We observed the Joe Biden in the debates with the black eyes. I mean, the black, instead of green eyes or blue eyes, which he used to have blue eyes, and then he shows up with these black eyes, and there's a lot of speculation. Is he wearing some special contacts that he can read the answers on, or is he, just using some black contacts just for cosmetic purposes? Why did his eyes change from blue to black with no explanation? And then we have the vapid nature of his comments. Whenever he says things, he really doesn't say anything, except for it always is. He always says like, "Well, look, as if that gives him some type of gravitas. But we don't give him a pass for that. And in the past, he was a racist. He spoke early in his political career, running for Senate, I think, or some statewide election, in which he talked about how bad it would be to have black people coming into the schools and mingling. That he was appealing to the upper class of Delaware, who would participate and would be part of what we've identified as this Eastern establishment of eugenicist-related families. So we have that aspect. We also have him saying, "I am a Zionist." So if he's a Zionist, does that mean he's a believer in the Greater Israel Project? Does it mean he's a supporter of the British imperial Zionism? And we also have a number of other references that he really is an Anglophile and seems to, he picked a name out of a book referring to a, um, a British agent, and kind of referred to himself as that name in correspondence. And we do have the current opinions of Harley Schlanger and others that he is working really for the British imperial system. Now, I read a, a wonderful column by Barbara Boyd this morning who called these people blimps. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful uh, creation, BLIMP. It stands for British Liberal Imperialists, the blimps. Of course, that's a Winston Churchill type of blimp. All right, let me go ahead and get to Yoichi's article here. And I think I'm going to read the whole thing, even though it's not all about Biden, because it is all about the values and the question of what are basic American values as opposed to the values of a Joe Biden. You know, there's one other article I pulled up I want to share with you first, and this is from Bloomberg on November 16th, 2020 by Peter Martin. And the article reads, Kissinger warns Biden of U.S.-China catastrophe on the scale of World War I. Former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger said the incoming Biden administration should move quickly to restore lines of communication with China that frayed during the Trump years, or risk a crisis that could escalate into military conflict. Quote, unless there is some basis for cooperative action, the world will slide into a catastrophe comparable to World War I, unquote, Kissinger said during the opening session of the Bloomberg New Economy Forum. He said military technologies available today would make such a crisis even more difficult to control than those of earlier eras. And what do you think he meant by military technologies? Did he happen to have certain bioweapons programs in mind? Yeah, I think he probably did. Quote, America and China are now drifting increasingly toward confrontation, and they're conducting their diplomacy in a confrontational way, unquote, the 97-year-old Kissinger said in an interview with Bloomberg News. The danger is that some crisis will occur that will go beyond rhetoric into actual military conflict. The diplomat who paved the way for President Richard Nixon's historic 1972 trip to China said he hoped that the shared threat of the COVID-19 pandemic would provide an opening for political discussions between the two countries when Biden takes office on January 20th. Quote, and this is Kissinger again, if you can look at COVID as a warning, in the sense that in practice it is dealt with by each country largely autonomously, but its long-term solution has to be on some global basis. Kissinger said, it should be dealt with as a lesson, unquote. U.S.-China relations are at the lowest in decades, despite the two sides reaching a, quote, Phase 1 trade deal at the start of the year. Since then, the virus outbreak that began in Wuhan, China, has gone global, killing more than 1.3 million people and crushing economies around the world. Well, that's a heck of a warning, isn't it? I won't go any further with this article, but just to say that it's quite clear that Kissinger was expecting Biden to win. Bloomberg was expecting Biden to win, And Bloomberg put together this new economy forum, which really basically puts together all of the usual suspects in the New World Order project. So 1972 was preceded by 1971, a secret trip by Kissinger, and that was preceded according to Yoichi Shimatsu, by a number of earlier trips in which he says Joe Biden was a participant. So let's get into that now. November 16th, 2020, by Yoichi Shimatsu, and you can find this at rents.com. After being, quote, encouraged to leave several countries of Asia due to my attempts in instilling truthful journalism among their youth and resistance to censorship, I've been since traveling throughout the USA, sniffing around much like an old wolf out of its cage and reintroduced to nature. I feel that it's good to be lean and hungry, even though I am surprised at how the deer cannot figure roadkill, and the sheep remain content behind electric wire. During the many decades of my absence, other than to the West Coast and New York, which hardly have any resemblance to the rest of the country other than the criminality of politicians, the vast middle stretches of the not-so-new world is different from my college days in Indiana, enjoying now with trappings of prosperity thanks to dollar stores, while families suffer the same old financial insecurity. The more things change, as the saying goes. Today's nemesis is the repressive COVID overkill of distancing and business closures, not much different from the Arab oil embargo of the 1970s. It's an interesting comparison. I remember the Arab oil industry, and I remember the economy was doing nothing. And so I remember a summer vacation in which I had no job. I was just sitting around my mom's house, bored and trying to entertain myself, as there wasn't anything happening. Again, when I graduated in '74 from college, the economy was stalled. There was nothing happening. And that is associated, of course, with the Arab oil embargo, which was a Kissinger project. And we go from there to Mark Rich and all the great research that everyone's been doing about that subject, especially Mark Kulak, who we'll see tonight here on McDuff Channel at 8 p.m. Eastern. The heavy hand of bureaucracy is heavier depending on the state. Pennsylvania's Green New Deal, killing off agriculture and animal husbandry, as opposed to Wyoming, which buffalo and cowboys still roam. It's depressing to realize the near total disappearance of the horse and cowboy culture, with pastures rolling with hay for Angus herds, now that filling the belly has become more of a priority than riding high in the saddle. Despite the sadness in the air and decline in rules of the road, there are still glimmers of America's former greatness of spirit, which hopefully can be revived in an uphill battle against sloth, gluttony, medication, and mindless greed. Jacksonian values. Just a few days ago, my appreciation for American courage was refreshed on a visit to the Hermitage, the historic home of President Andrew Jackson, that youthful hero of the Revolutionary War and undaunted victor at the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812. The frugal Tennessee general and grassroots politician was able to use the cheap local lumber, beams, and boards of poplar ash to create the appearance of classical Grecian grandeur for his mansion, as if it were built with stone. His objective being to connect the rugged values of populist democracy on the frontier with distant ancient roots, freedom of thought and action being characteristics of a sovereign people. I was surprised to learn that an elderly Marquis de Lafayette had a similar admiration of the homespun simplicity behind the elegant facade on his visit to Nashville in 1825. The Marquis and Old Hickory are heroes of yore and for ages to come, although ignored in the present era of craven self-interest, hypocritical political correctness, and unabashed fraud as a lifestyle. And worse, not snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays our nation's postal workers from the swift completion of their appointed ballot stuffing. Say it ain't so, Joe. Even Amazon and DoorDash do not limit their delivery services to Democrats. I hate to admit it, it's proof that the USPS should be privatized to be rid of Tammany Hall influence. My other gripe about this once great democracy has to do with the public's utter loss of faith from sea to radioactively poisoned sea. Along every byway that I've traveled, from the two-lane Tina Turner Highway in Georgia to Beartooth Pass between Wyoming and Montana, all the churches are locked up, parking lots empty and curtains drawn, with neither pastor nor deacon willing to risk offering a prayer or dispensing a chalice of wine in this year of coronavirus and electoral fraud. A silent crisis of state and religion is obliterating this nation's traditional values. American values are being killed off, not just by the infection rate or digital sloth or mindless arson, but more from the unrelenting intent by our own worst sworn enemy, as astutely predicted by the Marquis de Lafayette. Quote, "It is my opinion that if the liberties of this country, the United States of America, are destroyed, it will be by the subtlety of the Roman Catholic Jesuit priests, for they are the most crafty, dangerous enemies to civil and religious liberty. They have instigated most of the wars of Europe." Unquote. So what's it have to do with Joe Biden, a member in good standing in the Knights of Malta, servant of the Illuminati Order of the British Empire, and Jesuit CIA spy? Nothing to a mind-controlled clone, everything if one happens to be a patriot. Excuse me a second. The crimes of Uncle Joe. Briefly, the objective of the Biden vote-buying operation is World War III, starting with a NATO assault against Russia. In short, a revival of the eastward expansion policy of the Clinton era. The effectiveness of drones against battle tanks is seen by agency tacticians as enabling at last the technical means to defeat Russian armored forces. The deeper motive involves the historical drive of the Jesuits, as led by Jesuit-trained intel execs like Bill Donovan, Casey, Angleton, and Dulles, to exterminate the Orthodox Church of Russia, which has lasting ties with the churches of the East, including those ancient faith communities in the Aramaic-speaking region of Jesus of Galilee. The Vatican's sectarian vendetta that began with the Great Schism has since morphed into unholy alliances with the Habsburg Empire, its Frankist Jewish spies, the Rothschild Illuminati, and institutionalized by the Society of Jesus, IHS, the Jesuits. For agnostics and non-Christians, it is sufficient to realize that the concentration of secular and military power by manipulative pseudo-religious fanatics perverting the mass media, artificial intelligence, and chipping tech is completely unacceptable, and the Biden cabal must be stopped by the appropriate means in every situation. In this geopolitical perspective, the Biden's intrigues in Ukraine figure massively in the Jesuit NATO preparations for a coming invasion of Russia, Belarus, and Central Asia, and when that bloody work is done, Iran and China, before victory in World War III is declared by whoever is left standing. For Christians, only one word is needed to describe this looming age of evil, that being Antichrist, which translates to the secularists as a big, bad apple. Biden's foreign intrigues. Here are other points that should encourage a serious and thorough investigation into the election fraud by the Jesuit-controlled Biden-Pelosi criminal cabal. Young Joseph Robinette Biden cut his teeth as a CIA recruit during the late 1960s on a secret mission to the Red Guards base on the Tian Shan Mountains of Xinjiang, China, to monitor Soviet nuclear blasts at the nearby Semipalatinsk test site. During the Sino-Soviet split, the CIA links with PLA chief Lin Piao were conducted through a Jesuit-created Maoist cult called the Progressive Labor Party, comprised of brain-damaged victims of the MK-Ultra program. Now, that's a lot to take in at once, so let's think about that. The MK-Ultra program, the program that they use to destroy people's minds and personalities and, cause them to lose their sense of self, lose their ability to function, and make them subject to, hopefully, what they want to do, which is to reprogram them to make them agents of themselves, of the deep state, or in the case of what Yoichi Shimatsu says, the Jesuits. And it's certainly consistent with what the Marquis de Lafayette said 200 years ago. So did they do that in China? I imagine they did, yeah. And so is it reasonable to say that the brain-damaged victims of the MK-Ultra program were inducted into this Progressive Labor Party and used by the Jesuits? I think so. Biden soon thereafter returned to China as a freshman senator, fronting for the CIA. As it turns out, the airplane escape of the infamous leftist Lin Piao to evade arrest in Beijing was not toward the Soviet Union as in the official claim, but as revealed to me recently by a military intelligence officer actually destined for Alaska. The CIA and the Red Guards were partners in war crimes by then, involved in looting and sabotaging Chinese cargo trains loaded with war material destined for North Vietnam. The Sino-CIA relationship survived Lin Piao as the Soviet split continued to widen, culminating in their joint support for the Vatican's warlord Joseph Savimbi in the Angola Wars, which killed more than 2 million civilians. Thus, the China link goes much deeper than bagman Hunter Biden's lobbying for Beijing on Capitol Hill, which was just a small part of the funding flow from Beijing to Langley, Virginia, as an IOU to the CIA. The Jesuit connections with China began in the 18th century mission of priest Matteo Ricci as a papal emissary to the court of the Manchu Qing dynasty, that's Qing, however that is pronounced, I apologize, and have never relented, with the continuing presence of Jesuits in Macau, a base for liaison and cooperation on the mainland. Much of the anti-American tilt of late across Asia and Europe is a coordinated policy of the Jesuit order aimed at quelling the conservative American Catholic faction over Taiwan and Hong Kong policy and suppressing any other points of resistance. Francis, the Grey Pontiff, being both white and black popes, must feel a kindred spirit with the ambiguous Bidens. Now here's an interesting one about HIV and Kosovo, which I would love to have somebody see if you can verify this. The HIV blood factor. During the George W. Bush and Bill Clinton administrations, Joe Biden took to a point man role in fomenting and sponsoring the CIA operations against Yugoslavia. As a senior member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Biden was the Jesuit point man for NATO interventions against Yugoslavia, especially Croatia, where pro-Mussolini fascist-era death squads were revived by the CIA and British-led Special Air Service against the predominantly Orthodox Christian Serbs. NATO eastward expansion was actually a latter-day crusade. And I'll make a reference here to my readings on the World War II period involving the church, especially the book by John Cornwell, which I think is at hand here. Maybe not, but it's the one called Hitler's Pope. And in there you find that Pope Pius XII, whose real name is Pacelli, one of the northern Italian black nobility families. This Pope, Pius XII, was absolutely rabid, hated the Serbian Orthodox Church. And a lot of the efforts that were made during the war by the Ustashi, the Croatian pro-Roman Catholics, versus the Serbian Orthodox Catholics, these were inspired by Pope Pius XII and the terror campaign and the horrific killings were part and parcel of the Nazi regime. So we see an animus, a hatred of Pius XII against the Serbs that is now still a factor when considering why is Serbia today at the center of our attention. Well, let's read some more. The Balkans intervention took a horrendous turn when the Jesuit-linked charity AmeriCares flew pallets of Factor 4, that's IV, 4, blood, tainted with HIV, into the Balkans war zone. The HIV-infected serum was collected at Arkansas state prisons while Bill Clinton was governor of that state and running cocaine shipments from war-torn Central America into Mena Airfield in western Arkansas. The Factor 4 flights left from Connecticut to Shannon Airport, a CIA-Provo IRA safe haven for drugs and weapons. And then on to a cargo terminal in Frankfurt, Germany, where it was met by Jesuit priests involved in Balkans covert weapons shipment, and then to Zagreb, Croatia, for distribution by a CIA-funded local hospital administrator-physician to unknowing war wound victims in Bosnia, Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, and Kosovo. The purpose of deliberate infection of warring communities was to find an ethnic group with inherent HIV resistance in the biologically diverse and physically isolated Balkans communities. The Obama appointee, Jim Yong Kim, as the World Bank chief, resulted in absurdly low infection estimates with rigged data to hide the extent of this war crime of medical abuse in the Balkans, of which Joe Biden and his fellow Jesuit spooks were and are guilty to the brink of damnation. Faith is sometimes just a fig leaf to cover over evil. Meanwhile, the Ukraine-Russia conflict is simmering and remains underreported in the State Department's CIA complicit media. Hunter Biden's absurdly generous payments from Burisma, according to one of my sources, was not simply to bribe his father and the Obama cronies, but had everything to do with payment for secret weapons shipments in the conflict with Russian-backed militias in the eastern Donetsk region. The CIA executives are profiting as middlemen in that trade with international arms dealers. The Bidens are brutal murderers whose toes properly should be stretched on the same gallows as that other Jesuit stooge Benito Mussolini. Tony Fauci, another Jesuit agent, is responsible for using NIH funds for the bioweapon engineering of COVID-19 in Wisconsin, Manitoba, and Bristol, England, as tracked in my 27-part series. Mass murder is a capital offense which the Supreme Court has managed to ignore. Let me conclude with the connection of the Jesuits and the Illuminati with Joe Biden's nomination and personal accompaniment of Mike Bloomberg to his knighting by the Queen of England into the Royal Order of the Knights of the British Empire, the KBE, as discussed in my in-depth article on Bloomy, which apparently has been censored by the CIA, British Intel, and the Rothschilds. The Jesuit Illuminati link is based on Adam Weisskopf's personal evolution as a Jesuit novice to found the Illuminism. Any doubters among the PC academics should read Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Travels in Italy, which include his praise of the papal banned Jesuits at the ruins of their former college in Berea, northern Italy. Goethe was the leading light of the Illuminati in the late 18th century. Assuredly, it all goes deeper and wider, and religion and political correctness are being used as a cover for mass murder on a global scale. The Marquis de Lafayette and Andrew Jackson were the saviors of this country, but in contrast, the Bidens, Clintons, Obamas, and Pelosi et al. Are damning a once fine nation to the lower depths of hell. So stand with what's right to break their evil spell. To quote Andrew Jackson, the Bible is the rock upon which this republic rests. It's high time to reopen the church doors to break the demonic spell that grips this great land. And that concludes the essay November 16th of 2020 by Yoichi Shimatsu. And again, my thanks to Professor Hamamoto for turning me on to this great writer and his intriguing and a little frustratingly, lacking in footnotes. But on the same time, as oftentimes you can triangulate with other sources that you have to decide whether you're going to believe or not. And probably he's protecting his sources to a great extent. As you know, he often says he spoke to someone in military intelligence, but he's not going to let us figure out who that might have been in order to protect them, which is a sensible course of action for any journalist, I think. So now we know that there is a voice out there that is tying Joe Biden not only to the corporate interests of Delaware, meaning the DuPonts and the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, but also to the Jesuits, the military order of the Society of Jesus. Talk about a deceptive name. There was nothing military about Jesus, but there's everything military about the Society of Jesus, which we call the Jesuits. Well, now I'm looking back at the chat room here, and I just want to say hello to everyone. And let's see. A lot of interesting comments here, thought-provoking indeed. Um, well, there's a lot of great comments here. Probably everyone has their opinion on this, which makes it a good subject to talk about. Um, are the Jesuits running the Zionists, or the Zionists running the Jesuits? There's a interesting conundrum for you. But I do recommend that you go to Rinse and check out all of the essays of Yoichi Shimatsu for some really thought-provoking information. And oh, Connie, you're late. And what am I reading? I am reading. Let me give this to you. It is an essay by Yoichi Shimatsu, November 16th, 2020. The caption is Biden is a brutal enforcer of the Jesuit Illuminati globalist warmongers. And you can find that at rinse.com. And yeah, just go to rinse.com and put it in their search engine and you will find it. And Connie, I know you're one of the leading voices here on the behalf of Serbia and the horrific story of that much abused nation. And I thank you for all of your work, for your incredible reporting and support of George Webb with your transcripts available on Patreon. Guys, if you haven't joined Connie's Patreon, please do that. You'll find there that you can read transcripts, almost, same day transcripts in many cases of George Webb's work. And Connie, you're doing terrific work, and I support you, and I know everybody here at McDuff Channel is grateful for what you do. Let me see if there's anything else we want to close out with. Nan wants to know, was Hitler a Jesuit? I wouldn't go that far, but I do think Himmler was. I think Heinrich Himmler was, and I can't prove it to you right now, but I've read that in various different sources, and it makes sense. He did say, or was it Hitler? I think Hitler said that he fashioned his SS after the Jesuits in terms of the order of battle, And famously, the Jesuits is a perfect triangle organization that the person at the top tells everybody below him what is happening and what the truth is and what you need to believe and what you need to do. And you will follow that with absolute faith in your superiors, which basically cuts out your ability to reason, cuts out your own humanity in favor of the Jesuit superior, also known as the Black Pope, and sometimes referred to also as the Antichrist. Well, is Joe Biden a Jesuit? I think he is. I think he's an actor on behalf of the Jesuits, and that's why he's such an empty vessel. He's an empty vessel. He's a shell. That's why he needs his wife, Jill, to push him around and point him to the microphone. It's over there, Joe. And keep everybody else away from him while he's transferring from the basement to the podium and back again as fast as he can. Yep, I think he's a nobody. He's a shell. He stands for nothing. And that's why the Orange Man Bad campaign was so necessary, that they had to revile President Trump so deeply, so badly, and create all these psychological triggers. The Trump derangement syndrome became real. It was a positive effort to get people to not look at Joe Biden looking for any substance, because there isn't any. There is really no Joe Biden. I'll see you tonight with Mark and Bill. Going to be a great show. Looking forward to that. Mark Kulak's, Bill Taylor, and me together for the first time in one show, 8 p.m. tonight on McDuff _2020.